On September 21st, 1912, a young boy was born in the town of Spokane, Washington. This wouldn't be his hometown for very long though, as a few years after his birth, the boy, his parents, and his 3 siblings packed up their belongings and headed to Los Angeles, California. The boy's father was an ambitious businessman who was always looking for new opportunities, and he figured California was the best place to find them. For most of the early 20s, the boy's father would start a new business venture by purchasing stacks of paper and pencils with the company's name on them. These businesses would often fail after a few months, leaving the frustrated father with tons of useless pencils and stationery. The father would turn over all this material to his 4 children, instructing them to use all of it as fast as possible. The young boy found himself drawing constantly, and while his father never denigrated nor encouraged his creative side, he did instill the young boy with a healthy respect for the craft. Soon the young boy grew into a young man, who decided that he wanted to get serious about his art career. He began attending the Chouinard Art Institute while working part-time as a janitor. He recalled a time where a professor told the entire class that everyone had 100,000 bad drawings inside of them, and that they had to get them out immediately if they ever wanted to pursue a serious career in art. This relieved the young artist, as his childhood experience with his father's stationery meant that he was well past the 200,000 mark. Soon after graduating in 1931, the young artist was able to take a job at the newly formed studio helmed by Ub Iwerks, who had just left Walt Disney Studios after a bitter falling out with the man himself. There he began work as a cell washer, before moving up to becoming a cell painter, to then transitioning to being an in-betweener. By early 1933 though, the young artist caught wind of an opportunity of a lifetime. Warner Brothers producer Leon Schlesinger was forming a brand new animation studio, and animators from Los Angeles to New York were being enticed to join this new outfit with a salary of $65 a week, around $1,300 in today's money. Intrigued by this, the young artist decided to quit his job with Iwerks and head over to this brand new studio. Upon being given an assistant animator position right as he walked through the door, the artist, named Charles M. Jones, knew he had made the best decision of his life.
Okay, Smokey, roll 'em. And now if you'll all be quiet, we'll start the show. Chapter 1. Once upon a time. Great opening, huh? Who? Disassociated Press? The public has been demanding my life story?
In early 1933, Leon Schlesinger founded Leon Schlesinger Productions. With his 2 primary cartoon makers, Hugh Harman and Rudy Ising, leaving at the end of their tenure and taking Warner Brothers cartoon star Bosco with them, Schlesinger had taken measures to ensure that he would still be able to produce the shorts Warner Brothers Studio had ordered. He had developed a strong relationship with studio head Jack Warner, and was not about to risk that by promising things that he could not deliver. There was only one problem: Leon Schlesinger Productions had no animators. Every Warner Brothers animator was currently working for Harmonizing Studios, and they all intended to stick by their bosses. For now anyways. Leon knew nothing about the intricacies of animation, but he did have an eye for animation talent. And with that eye, he began the first part of his master plan: raiding other animation studios for talent. Schlesinger was able to snag young Bob Clampett early from Harmonizing, despite other staffers such as Freeling and McKimson telling him not to work for Leon under any circumstances. Leon also reached across the country to New York City, where he hired Van Buren animator Frank Tashlin, who was then credited under his nickname Tish Tash. But his favorite target was the arch-rival Walt Disney Studios, because that was the studio Schlesinger sought to emulate. From Disney, he hired animators Tom Palmer and Jack King. The staff of the newly formed Leon Schlesinger Productions was sequestered into a small clapboard building located on 5800 Sunset Boulevard. The accommodations were Spartan, but the atmosphere was palatable, likened to that of a bustling gold rush town. Since the staff mostly consisted of young men, only a handful were over the age of 30, Schlesinger Productions felt more like a frat house than an animation studio, with antics including water gun wars, setting off firecrackers, and tying streamers to the various flies that inhabited the building. And because the studio opened while America was in the depths of the Great Depression, it meant animators and staff of this caliber were hard to come by, and that working for Leon, a man who needed all the help that he could get, allowed you some amazing job security. You could drink or come in at any hour you wanted. They were on us every minute to keep working, but they wouldn't fire you. But regardless of the wild and wacky atmosphere, Schlesinger wanted to directly compete with the kinds of cartoons Disney was putting out at the time. To do that, he named Palmer the production manager and head director, while King was named the head animator. With those two in charge, Leon hoped to outdo Disney in ways that Harmon and Ising could only dream of. He made this goal clear when he announced to his entire staff, "From now on, boys, we're gonna make them cute." With that philosophy in mind, the staff at Schlesinger's created Bosco's replacement, who would no doubt be the future face of Warner Bros. Animation, Buddy. Directed by Tom Palmer and released on September 9th, 1933, Buddy's Day Out was a simple short about the titular character going on a picnic with his gal Cookie, only for him to have to rescue Cookie's baby brother Elmer. It was intended to be the debut of Warner's new animated star. Instead, it was so much of a disaster that Warner Bros. Rejected it outright. Tom Palmer, despite his Disney pedigree, was a lousy director. Bernard Brown would recall that Palmer's directions and story conferences were very vague, saying things about how they should do a funny piece of business here, but not specifying what exactly that funny piece of business was. The result was a cartoon that seemed suspiciously bereft of jokes. Warner Bros. Refused to accept it and had it sent back to be reworked to actually add gags. Even the reworked cartoons still showed how little humor Palmer's style contained. The pacing was lethargic, and the timing of all the so-called gags was so loose it made them feel forced. This was not helped by Palmer's insistence that the animators do away with the rubbery flexibility of the Bosco cartoons in favor of a more realistic direction, which could explain why everything in the short feels so listless and drawn out. It was clear to Schlesinger that Palmer was not his guy. After the Buddy's Day Out fiasco and I've Gotta Sing a Torch song, Palmer's sole Merry Melodies credits, Leon decided to give Palmer the boot. Palmer would immediately be replaced by Earl Duvall, a storyman who, at the time, was mostly known for his work in the Disney comics. Duvall proved to be a much better fit than Palmer. He knew how to get the best out of animators like King and Tashlin, having them re-implement the flexible style of Harmon and Ising, thus making the animation and gags feel a lot livelier. Being the original creator for Buddy, Duvall also reworked him into something that could fit the cartoon mold better. He was also not afraid to go for more daring animation sequences, like this one seen in the Merry Melody short sitting on a backyard fence. Duvall's skill as a director was so noticeable that he was able to nail the director spot for the first color Warner Bros. Shorts, Honeymoon Hotel. Because Walt Disney had exclusive rights to the 3-strip Technicolor process, the cartoon instead used 2 strips Cinecolor. While having a fairly simple plot of anthropomorphic bugs trying to escape a hotel on fire during their honeymoon, it was one of the most lavishly animated Warner Bros. Short of that time, probably thanks to having a team consisting of uncredited animators like Bob Clampett, Frank Tashlin, and Chuck Jones. Sadly, Duvall wouldn't stick around for long, however. While he lasted longer than Palmer, he also had a higher opinion of himself than Palmer. This would eventually lead to an event where he barged into Leon's office one afternoon, drunk off his ass, and demanded an astronomical raise in salary. Duvall was fired effective immediately, and he would eventually retire from the animation business by the 1940s. The transition was going a lot less smoothly than Leon had hoped. The lack of experienced or sober directors meant that Schlesinger Productions was scrambling for leaders. It got to the point where Bernard Brown, a man with little animation background, had to direct 2 shorts on top of editing them and composing the music for them alongside Frank Marsalis' replacement Norman Spencer. Leon needed someone from Harmon Ising's core team to take the lead and help smooth out this bumpy transition. So either through some slick cajoling or begging, Schlesinger was able to convince Friz Freleng to come back to Warner Bros. On September 27, 1933. Robert McKempson followed 2 days later, much to the bemusement of Clampett. Freleng made his official debut with Buddy the Gob. Out of all the possible members of Harmon Ising's inner circle, Freleng was the best choice as he helped Harmon co-direct some of the last slate of Bosco cartoons. Leon knew he had the experience and had him take over Duvall's unit. After testing his skills on 2 more Buddy shorts, Freleng was assigned to be the primary director for the Merry Melody series, starting with Beauty and the Beast, the second short filmed in Cinecolor before switching back to black and white. If there was a word to describe Freeling's first year at Warner Brothers, it would be cautious. For the most part, it felt like Freeling was just picking up where Rudy Eising had left off. Well-animated shorts with sharp musical timing and rhythm, but ultimately still had the feel of Disney with a lower budget. And while these shorts could have a clever joke here or there, Freeling's first slate of Merrie Melodies mostly just came off as either boring, derivative, or incredibly racist. But the Merrie Melodies were in a better place than the Looney Tunes shorts, which were struggling thanks to their so-called star. While Bosco does come off as a flat character nowadays, Buddy was a pale imitation of him in more ways than one. Bob Clampett infamously referred to him as Bosco in whiteface. From design to animation, Buddy was Bosco without the charm or the energy, not helped by the animators trying to make him look more endearing by gradually redesigning him to look cuter and more childlike, which restricted what already very little humorous potential he could have had.
Blow your nosy. Attaboy.
Buddy's cartoons as a whole were also just, for lack of a better term, lame. Mostly directed by Jack King and a friend of Freeling's from Kansas City named Ben Bugs Hardaway, the Buddy shorts relied entirely on tired sight gags and musical segments that lacked any sort of vitality. This could be because the Hays Code was currently being implemented, thus necessitating the animators to refrain from using the racier, more barnyard humor-based gags of the Bosco cartoons. As such, the Buddy cartoons were the worst thing a cartoon short series could be: boring. Buddy was not a long-term solution, and if Schlesinger Productions wanted to keep going, they would need to find a replacement fast. By the 1934-35 season, Freeling had begun to settle into his place in the director's chair. The Merrie Melodies had now switched back to color, this time permanently, with the short Those Beautiful Dames. Even though the color palette was still limited, using two-colored hue Technicolor instead of Cinecolor, it gave another distinction between the two short series. From that point onward, Merrie Melodies would be in color, while Looney Tunes would be in black and white. And while the shorts still carried the imitation brand Disney feel, Freeling was starting to get more confident in his abilities to insert snappier gags into them, making them a lot more smart-alecky than the Disney shorts they were trying to be. While they might not seem like much now, it was definitely Freeling's Merrie Melodies that was keeping Schlesinger Productions' head above water. However, they were weighed down by the Looney Tunes and its terminally uninteresting star, Buddy, and that was a weight they needed to cut to ensure the studio's longevity. It was decided that a Merrie Melodies cartoon that Freeling was working on, a riff on the then popular Our Gang shorts, would also serve as a testing ground for potential new stars that would replace Buddy. Titled I Haven't Got a Hat, the short was released on March 2nd, 1935. Centered around a school talent show, the short introduced a slate of brand new characters that were later to be used in the Looney Tunes shorts. Oliver Owl, a snobby owl, Ham and X, a pair of twin puppies who sing the titular song,
I tip my hat to you. I do just that. Take it right off for you, but I haven't got a hat.
Little Kitty, a fidgety, nervous kitten,
Mary had a little lamb. Its fleece was white as cornflakes.
and Beans the cat, a mischievous little trickster who served as the de facto main character of the shorts. But out of all the new characters introduced, it would be this character that really stood out from the bunch.
We will now open our exercises with a recitation by our little friend, Porky Pig.
Listen, my children, and you shall hear the midnight ride of
Voiced by Joe Doherty, a dress extra for Warner Brothers, the sight of the character named Porky Pig stumbling through the midnight ride of Paul Revere proved to be the most memorable part of the cartoon. Freeling gave the character a stutter because he thought it was a unique trait that would help distinguish Porky from the pack, helped in part by the sped-up voice of Doherty, who spoke with an actual stutter. With the cast assembled, the transition from Buddy to the new Looney Tunes stars was already in place. On August 24th, the last Buddy cartoon, Buddy the G-Man, premiered, and given that the short barely features the titular star, you could tell the animators were desperate to be done with him. The first non-Buddy Looney Tunes short, A Cartoonist's Nightmare, released on September 21st. Directed by Jack King, the short involved an incredibly meta story about a cartoonist being kidnapped by his own creations and only starred Beans. The next short, Hollywood Capers, would slowly introduce Beans' supporting cast with Kitty and Oliver Owl, who would immediately get retired after this short. But for the first Looney Tunes short that would serve as the introduction to Porky to the cast, Leon decided to give that short to one of his newest hires. He was a heavyset Texan who had been working for Walter Lance's studio since 1930. By all accounts, the atmosphere there was even rowdier than Schlesinger's studio, so much so that the Texan ended up going blind in one eye after a prank involving a slingshot and a paperclip went wrong. Despite that freak injury, it didn't affect his creative output, and the Texan always spoke highly of his experience at Lance's studio, but eventually he would grow weary of his time there. In April 1935, the Texan wound up fired for slacking off after being dissatisfied with his low salary and little creative freedom. After spending a long honeymoon in Oregon with his newly wedded wife, the first thing the Texan did when he got back to Los Angeles was head on over to the Warner Brothers lot. Walking into Leon's office, the Texan introduced himself as Frederick Bean Avery, animation director. I went down to Schlesinger and I said, "Hey, I'm a director." Hell, I was no more a director than nothing. But with my loud mouth, I talked him into it. He said, "Okay, you draw up a board, here's our characters, I'll run some stuff for you." Among the characters was a stuttering pig who recited a poem. Fred Avery, whom everyone in the business called Tex, officially joined the staff of Schlesinger Productions on May of 1935. Tex, being the third full-time director in addition to Freeling and King, meant that things were getting very crowded in the original studio building. Avery and his newly formed unit were promptly moved into a small frame building in the middle of the lot. Defying all odds, it was somehow cheaper, more ramshackle, and filled with even more vermin than the main building. It was immediately christened with the nickname Termite Terrace. Avery's unit consisted of Bob Clampett, Chuck Jones, and two of his former colleagues from Universal, Sid Sutherland and Virgil Ross. And since Leon did not want animators wasting time walking from one building to the other, that staff of 4 was assigned exclusively to Avery. Released on November 2nd, Gold Diggers of 49 was a riff on the California Gold Rush. The short starred Beans, Kitty, and Porky, who for some reason was redesigned to be a bulkier, rounder adult figure that spoke in Doherty's natural speaking voice and was given a catchphrase. In many ways, Gold Diggers is seen as the transition from the old style of Warner Brothers to the style that would define the studio. While a lot of the gags do still lack the snappiness that would define the later shorts, what made them stand out was the fact that, unlike the gags in the Buddy cartoons, they were funny. An off-sided example of mixing good animation with good humor is the climax. Beans fills the radiator of his jalopy with moonshine, which causes the vehicle to speed up at such a rate, it devolves into a gray cloud of speed lines. Avery cited the Silly Symphony short, The Tortoise and the Hare, as his inspiration for the gag. The short is considered a landmark by historians for how it used lines and quick timing to showcase speed in animation. Avery took the techniques pioneered by this Disney short and streamlined them while also turning them up to 11, a method that he would continue to use throughout his career. Gold Diggers was a success, and it cemented Beans and Porky as the new stars of the Looney Tunes shorts. But of those two, Avery only seemed to be interested in developing one of them. Like Friz Freeling before him, Avery's first year at Schlesinger Productions was one based on caution. He had just bluffed his way into a well-paying job with a lot of creative leeway and wasn't about to blow it all up by pushing a few boundaries. But even if his start was slow in retrospect, it was easy to see the anarchic humor that Avery would soon be known for take shape. A good example would be 1936's The Blowout. The second Looney Tune cartoon that Avery directed, it saw him continue with the character of Porky, who was now redesigned to be more childlike, but still kept the jolly plumpness from Gold Diggers. The short is centered around Porky trying to get money for an ice cream soda, but inadvertently ends up thwarting a plot by a mad bomber in the process. The climax is one of the earliest examples of one of Tex's trademark rapid-fire gag sequences, in which the villain tries to escape the protagonist of the cartoon, but somehow the protagonist ends up finding a way to sneak up on them. If it wasn't made clear already, Tex had taken a shine to the porcine character. Unlike Beans, who was a pastiche of nearly every other cartoon character in the last 7 years, Porky was his own beast. A pig who had a design that was almost uniquely funny, even if Darty Stutter did most of the heavy lifting for his character.
Porky, Cornelius, Washington, Otis, Lincoln, Abner, Aloysius, Casper, Jefferson, Filbert, Horatius, Narcissus, Pig.
As the season pressed on, Avery began to settle into a groove and started becoming a lot more daring with his jokes. With the help of Chuck Jones and Virgil Ross, Avery not only helped Warner steer away from the Disney-esque realism, but also made liberal use of gags that took advantage of the cartoon medium and kicked any sense of realism to the curb. A fact that was helped by his unit redesigning Porky yet again to be a lot cuter and less pig-like. Arguably, it was the village smithy where Avery found his footing. Focusing on Porky working as a blacksmith's apprentice, the short is a great exercise in how Tex uses quick gags to build on top of each other until they reach a satisfying punchline, with the gags being paced quickly enough that they take the audience by surprise, but not so quickly that clarity is lost. It also featured what would later become an Avery trademark, characters interacting with the narrator.
Faster, faster, up and down, 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 up and down.
Oh, listen, Chief, take it easy. We got plenty of time. This cartoon ain't half over yet.
During this period, Avery and his unit also worked on a few Merrie Melody shorts, which were in the process of having a breakout year. Near the end of 1935, Disney's exclusivity rights for 3Hue Technicolor had run out, and Schlesinger Productions began using it in their cartoons almost immediately. And since they could now use blue hues alongside reds and greens, they began to open and end every Merrie Melody short with a shot of blue concentric rings as a technical test for the process. Schlesinger kicked off this new vision with the most visually ambitious Merrie Melody short of the time, Page Miss Glory. Page Miss Glory was practically a Fantasia piece before Fantasia even existed. A musical short with the focal point being amazing visuals done in a unique art style, here being the Art Deco aesthetic, a style that was popular at the time, but never before seen in animation. Leon had gotten the idea for the short when he was approached by a Chicago student named Leodora Congdon, who specialized in Art Deco and wanted to know if the style could be used in backgrounds for cartoons. Page Miss Glory is this grand experiment of adapting a slick, ultra-modernist art style with smooth animation, stunning backdrops, and a few clever gags here or there.
So when we're apart, and I begin to feel a teardrop.
Unfortunately, Tex Avery, who was the uncredited director, would later in life dismiss this short as lousy. This could be because Leon made the unusual choice of making all the animators go uncredited in the short and give all credit to Congdon, who was the short's art director, her sole credit in anything. But even if his heart wasn't in making the Merrie Melody short as much as the Looney Tunes shorts, Tex's perfectionist nature made it impossible for him to half-ass any cartoon he did. But even at their most saccharine, Avery shorts still had his zany, streetwise sense of humor, which really helped turn the shorts from just simple Disney ripoffs to Disney ripoffs with an edge.
Why this couple should not be joined in wedlock, let him now speak, or forever hold his peace.
The most triumphant example being the classic I Love to Singa. A riff on the jazz singer plot, the short actually benefited from Leon's mandatory song directive, with Avery being able to make a catchy tune be an integral part of the short's plot, as well as gags.
I love to sing about the moon and the June and the spring. I love to sing
It's a tune Avery enjoyed working with, and it allowed him to create a short that polished his sense of humor more noticeably than even the village smithy. It wasn't just Tex and his crew that was making classic Merrie Melodies. Frizz and his unit were also coming into their own by making shorts that began to give Warner Brothers cartoons their own sense of identity. Frizz and his unit began to lean heavily on parodying the high-profile stars of both film and radio, an example being the short The Cuckoo Nut Grove, which combined an Art Deco atmosphere with crazy caricatures of known celebrities like W.C. Fields, Clark Gable, and the Marx Brothers, all of which were provided by character designer Thornton T. Heat. Of course, such lampooning could also get them in trouble. Bing Crosby initiated lawsuits against the studio to suppress 2 shorts with Crosby analogs that he felt portrayed him in an unflattering light. Let It Be Me, which portrayed him as a lecherous cad, and Bingo Crosbyana, which portrayed him as a vainglorious coward. Even though he lost the case, it wouldn't affect Crosby too much, because as we all know, Bing Crosby's legacy is nothing but squeaky clean. But even with threats of lawsuit, Schlesinger Productions was on an upward trend. There was only one thing holding them back. While Tex took over the Porky cartoons, Jack King ended up making the Beans cartoons. Now Jack King was, by all means, a talented animator, and his long-term experience in the industry made him a great mentor for the younger animators at Schlesinger's. Bob Clampett even credited him for teaching him how to be loose with the models when animating the characters. But his main problem was that his cartoons weren't funny, and that's a big problem. Beans, being one in a dozen of mask face ink spot characters, was already going to be a hard sell. But instead of using the angry little troublemaker who stirred up chaos that Freeling had envisioned him as, King decided to continue what he had been doing with his buddy cartoons and make him a bland good guy character. Not only that, but in King's Beans cartoons, Beans was rarely the focal point. Unlike in Porky's cartoons where he is explicitly the protagonist, Beans feels like a character completely separate from the gags, the camera mostly focusing on a series of blackout gags or the antics of Ham and X. This wasn't helped by King's complete failure to make the jokes of his cartoons funny. His gags had neither the intricate construction of Freeling's nor the speed and unpredictability of Avery's. As it stood, Beans' cartoons were the most forgettable shorts that came out in that era. Compare Alpine Antics to the Blowout, and the differences are night and day. It wasn't before long that Leon handed down another mandate, saying that they would be doing away with all the new characters introduced in I Haven't Got a Hat, all for except Porky. Beans, along with Ham and X, would have their final appearance in Westward Woe, while Little Kitty would have her last appearance as a bit character in the Porky short Plain Dippy. From that point onward, Looney Tunes was strictly about Porky. It seemed like through this mandate that Leon was giving Avery a vote of confidence at King's expense. King did hang on by doing more Porky cartoons, but in a way, they were almost worse than his Beans output. Being forced to actually use Porky as a focal point meant that Porky was now the centerpiece for gags that were either forced and tired or just never executed correctly. And the rare gag that did end up landing would feel more accidental if anything. The final result was that Jack King's Porky cartoons were not funny so much as they were incredibly off-putting. Jack King was let go by Schlesinger Productions sometime in April of 1936 after completing his final short with Warner Brothers, Porky's Moving Day. He would end up going back to Disney where he would produce some of the classic Donald Duck shorts. But his tenure at Warner Brothers would be remembered as a failed experiment that went on for far too long. Leon would replace King with a recently rehired Frank Tashlin. Tashlin had been fired by Leon in '33 a few months into his tenure after Leon wanted a cut of the profits from his Van Boring comic strip series, to which Tashlin responded by telling Leon to go to hell. Tashlin had been working on both his strip and doing odd jobs for Ub Iwerks' studio before Schlesinger rehired him. Their earlier tiff having no bearing on this decision, as Leon, ever the shrewd businessman, believed that holding grudges was bad for business. Tashlin made his directorial debut with Porky's Poultry Plant. That short would also introduce the world to an important element of the Looney Tunes series, the music of Warner Brothers' newest composer, Carl W. Stalling. Being a musician who used to play accompaniment for silent films, including the first batch of Disney shorts, Stalling knew how important music was in matching on-screen action. While Brown and Spencer mostly used musical accompaniment as just accompaniment, Stalling used music to add to the humor being shown on screen. And while they might seem cliched today, Stalling also made use of the free music library that Warner Brothers had given him, filled with popular tunes that made perfect musical cues. Along with the creative editing and sound effect work of Treg Brown, who had taken over for his mentor of no relation Bernard Brown, Stalling helped define the entire sound design of a typical Warner Brothers cartoon. This fact would become all the more apparent when him and his orchestra produced the new theme for the Merry Melody shorts, which debuted in the short Boulevardier of the Bronx, a little ditty called Merrily We Roll Along. When the 1936-37 production season rolled along, Schlesinger Productions was no longer the chaotic mess it started out as. They were now able to keep up with other studios in the technology department, and the studio's directors and their respective units had gotten into their comfort zones and were now making cartoons that had their own identity and weren't just cheaper knockoffs of Disney shorts. Tex and his unit had even moved out of the crummy little building across the lot after Schlesinger consolidated everyone under one roof, and though Tex and company said goodbye to the old bungalow, the name Termite Terrace never went away. The nickname had instead been rechristened to the entirety of Schlesinger Productions, a befitting name for a group of people who saw themselves as scrappy underdogs. Friz Freeling's Merrie Melody shorts found their footing as riffs on popular media at the time, such as gangster pictures and melodramas, as well as exaggerated parodies of everyday Hollywood activities, such as A Night at the Movies. Frank Tashlin had carved out his niche almost immediately. A versatile cartoonist and gagman thanks to his experience with Van Boring, Tashlin approached the short with a more cinematic eye. Treating shorts as if they were films, he employed numerous filmmaking techniques such as dynamic camera angles, quick cuts, and montages. This gave his shorts with Porky a unique feel, both in terms of atmosphere and in humor. His short, The Case of the Stuttering Pig, feels less like an animated short and more like a gothic horror. He also introduced the world to a new Looney Tunes character, Porky's girlfriend, Petunia.
I'm not a listener, because I'm unaccustomed.
Shh, Petunia. Don't get excited. Don't get excited.
Excited! I'm excited! I'm not excited!
It wouldn't be too long that Tashlin got the opportunity to start doing Merrie Melody shorts. Fully embracing the musical aspect of the shorts, he used his talent in creating rapid-fire gags alongside Stallings' accompaniment to craft some truly memorable cartoons. A good example would be what animation historians call the Tashlin 3, which was a trilogy of shorts in the Books Come to Life After Hours variety that combined upbeat jazzy music with quick, well-executed jokes. These would include Speaking of the Weather, Have You Got Any Castles, and You're in Education. As for Tex Avery, he had definitely found his voice in delivering madcap sequences where he would take one joke and keep expanding on it until it grows more and more absurd. But with his Merrie Melodies output, he was more frustrated than ever thanks to the mandate that they had to center the shorts around a Warner Brothers song. We were forced to use a song which would just ruin the cartoon. You'd try like a fool to get funny, but it was seldom you did. But his frustration was short-lived. The role of songs in the shorts had just begun to slowly fade away, with the whole songs being reduced to just singular choruses at the beginning or middle of the cartoon. By January 1937, Leon and the other studio heads acquiesced and said that they didn't have to base a Merrie Melodies short around a melody if they didn't have to. This pleased Tex greatly, and he got to work on a Merrie Melodies short without a song. Unfortunately, that short was a parody of the novel Uncle Tom's Cabin titled Uncle Tom's Bungalow. It's a regrettable part of Warner Brothers animation history, but shorts and gags that featured black characters or parodies of black celebrities almost always reflected the racist Hollywood stereotypes of the time. And since these shorts were going in front of movies meant for white audiences, Schlesinger Productions had to meet audience expectations with how they saw non-whites. And even then it wasn't enough, for Friz Freeling got himself into hot water with the censors over the short Clean Pastures, not because of the stereotypes portrayed, but because of the portrayal of black people as heavenly beings was seen as blasphemous. To quote fellow YouTuber Paparina, the past was a mistake. Avery would also begin to break the unofficial rule that Merrie Melodies could only be one-offs with no reoccurring characters by introducing a bumbling yokel character by the name of Egghead.
And I saw your ad, so I came to the shop.
Because today I am a man.
But it was during this period where Avery made one of the most historically important cartoons of this era, Porky's Duck Hunt. The short, revolving around Porky's misadventures while attempting to bag a duck, would serve as the introduction for his new voice.
Don't worry, it's not loaded. We'll watch.
Joe Doherty's uncontrollable stutter was turning out to be more trouble than it was worth, what with how many takes they had to get per session, so it was decided that Doherty would be replaced by a friend of Treg Brown's named Mel Blank. The son of Russian Jewish immigrants, Blank had been a performer in vaudeville and radio ever since he graduated high school in 1927. By the mid-30s, he was a regular on NBC's Jack Benny program doing various roles and sound effects. The directors at Termite Terrace loved his voices, which were incredibly versatile along with being hilarious.
Did you ever hear electric organ? No. Oh, well, just listen to this.
Blank's first role would be in Picador Porky, where he played Porky's drunken sidekicks.
La cucaracha, la cucaracha! Play it on the old guitar! La cucaracha! Play it, please, sure!
But it was Porky's Duck Hunt that fully cemented Blank as the voice of Porky. He would also do a bit role in the short that would turn out to be a lot bigger than he or the animators imagined.
Hey, that wasn't in the script. Don't let it worry you, Skipper. I'm just a crazy, darn fool duck.
While he would voice Porky in other bit roles, Blank wasn't the only voice talent Termite Terrace had on call. Other talented voice actors of this era included radio actor Danny Webb. He would do most of the celebrity impressions seen in the shorts, as well as the distinct Joe Penner-esque voice of Egghead.
I'm a professional prize fighter. I can't get over.
And when they couldn't get radio talent, the Termite Terrace boys would do the voices themselves. Examples included writer Ted Pierce.
I think I'd better make this a close-up. Don't you think so, boys?
As well as Tex Avery himself.
And in this corner, the challenger at 6 7/8. Boy, what a physique.
But as far as voice actresses go, none were so ubiquitous to this era of Warner Animation than Bernice Hansel. A dressmaker who operated on the studio lot, Hansel voiced a lot of the cutesy characters seen in shorts around this time. Thanks to her naturally high-pitched voice, she could turn in a performance that sounded genuinely adorable.
Johnny! Johnny? What eating anyway? Well, Johnny, can't you see I love you?
And while some could argue that her cloying voice was a symptom of the wannabe Disney days of Warner, the directors liked her voice and knew how to make it funny.
Pinky? What were you going to do?
I was just going to,
With all these new developments, production on new cartoons at Termite Terrace was growing rapidly. In order to meet the production schedule for the season in the wake of Jack King's unceremonious departure, Leon penned a deal to outsource a few Looney Tunes shorts to iWorks Studio. iWorks had just been dropped by his primary financial beneficiary Pat Powers and was doing freelance work just to keep himself out of the red. This news did not sit well with Bob Clampett. Leon had been promising him a director's position that he was going to get once a new spot opened up. After voicing his displeasure, Leon made a deal with him. Since iWorks really did not know how to use the Warner characters, Clampett was going to be given the job to go over to his studio and assist him in directing. Clampett agreed to this, but only if he brought two of his guys with him, Bo Cannon and Chuck Jones. Using storyboards originating from Schlesinger's, 3 shorts were made at iWorks' studio, but only 2 of them were completed with iWorks at the helm, Porky and Gabby and Porky's Super Service. Despite being a talented animator with near mechanical precision, iWorks had many weaknesses as a director. Co-workers described him as being quiet, uncommunicative, and humorless, qualities that made directing cartoons difficult. These were exasperated when, during the making of the Warner shorts, it was made clear that he had no personal investment in them and was just doing them for a paycheck. The first short, Porky and Gabby, also did not endear itself by introducing a new sidekick to Porky, Gabby Goat.
Hey, you! Get that thing clear off the road. Move over, we ain't got all day.
An attempt to create an angry comedic foil in the vein of Donald Duck, Gabby never seemed to have any chemistry with Porky, and his curmudgeonly attitude came off more unpleasant than funny. It would not be surprising to know that he would be dropped after only 3 shorts. But on a May morning in 1937, shortly after turning 24, Bob Clampett walked into work and got a huge surprise. And then one Monday morning when I walked in, they told me, "Ob's gone, you're the director now." I had to sit down at Ob's desk, in Ob's chair, with Ob's stopwatch to make my first cartoon. Bob Clampett, who had been with the studio since the harmonizing days, was now a director. On June 24th, 1937, he would release his directorial debut, Porky's Bad Time Story. By the time he was wrapping up his second short, Get Rich Quick Porky, He and his staff were called back to the Warner Brothers lot, where they would be set up as a unit that made exclusively Looney Tunes shorts. Just in time, as the shorts would now start carrying the theme that would define the shorts until the end of time.
We take you to the entrance of the studio, just in time to see a group of happy Schlesinger employees arriving for work and eager for a new day.
That's a shrill lot of baloney. I don't know why you guys are working. A doggone old joint man. Me too.
Now we skip to 5:30 and show you the same employees reluctantly leaving for home.
By the 1937-38 season, Schlesinger Productions had become a very busy place. Frank Tashlin had become one of the last holdouts in centering his shorts around music, not just with merry melodies, but also with his Looney Tunes shorts. Using Stallings' music, he created memorable shorts such as the love letter to big band jazz, Porky at the Crocodero, and the musical morality play, Holy Smoke.
Smoke a lot and chew some more. Now that we have spoke, chew and chew and chew, chew. Little boys should not smoke.
Tex Avery had made two shorts that would later become long-serving templates. The first, Little Red Walking Hood, introduced the idea of the fractured fairy tale. Avery and his team would take known stories such as Little Red Riding Hood and Cinderella and lampoon them by dressing them with references to then modern culture and subverting the narrative.
Hello? Police? This is Cinderella, and my fairy godmother is 15 minutes late, and she's supposed to be here, and I gotta get to the ball. In other words, go get her, boys!
The second, The Isle of Pingo Pongo, despite being chock full of racist stereotypes, introduced the travelogue parody. Using the through line of a narrated travelogue, the short found itself to be the perfect vehicle for a series of quick, rapid-fire blackout gags.
We find a tiny baby canary bird calling to its mother. Mama!
A constant in both of these shorts was the presence of a little guy with a big nose wearing an ill-fitting green suit, often appearing as the source for the cartoon's running gag. Many people assumed that he was a version of Egghead that Tex had redesigned, but model sheets, lobby cards, and this joke tell a different story. But he wasn't the only character that Avery popularized that year. The response from last year's Porky's Duck Hunt was quite positive, with the favorite gag being the one involving the crazy, darn fool duck. Avery decided to do a pseudo-remake of that short for Merry Melodies, this time pitting his character Egghead against that same black duck that bedeviled Porky. It would also be the short where the character was given an official name.
My name is Daffy Duck. I work on a merry-go-round. The job was swell. I did quite well till the merry-go-round broke down.
Though it was his second appearance, Daffy Duck and Egghead was the true beginning of the titular star. Unlike the straight-laced Porky, Daffy was an agent of chaos, hooping and hollering around a world that appeared to bend to his will while causing nothing but trouble for its denizens, whether they deserved it or not.
You know, that duck's screwy.
You're correct! Absolutely correct!
But even though the boys at Termite Terrace knew what they wanted out of their cartoon shorts, it still didn't stop people from leaving. One of them being Friz Freleng. In late 1937, Freleng accepted an offer made by Fred Quimby to direct cartoons at MGM Studios. Not only was he promised the same amount of creative freedom he had at Schlesinger's, but he would also be given a huge increase in salary and budget. Freleng's unit would be inherited by Cal Dalton and Cal Howard. The two of them would go on to direct two shorts, one of them being the classic jazz-based Merry Melody short, Catnip College.
It's awful easy, baby, to make me think it's to make me think that it's true.
But after those two shorts, Howard would then be replaced by Bugs Hardaway. In these tumultuous times at Termite Terrace, the director whose voice emerged the strongest was Bob Clampett. Like every other director at the studio, his start was cautious, but even then you could tell he had his own voice that separated his short from everyone else's. The humor of a Clampett cartoon was not based on comic-style gags like Freleng's or Tashlin's, nor were they based on wild subversions of expectations like Avery's. They were more based on what Clampett personally thought was funny. This philosophy of humor gave his cartoons a very schoolboy quality to them, but Clampett shorts also had an unusual vigor about them. Bob Clampett was a man with a very big imagination, and used that imagination to really push past the boundaries of what was thought to be possible in animation, and he was able to get away with it thanks to the studio having much lower expectations for the black and white cartoons. With a staff that included animators such as Izzy Ellis and Norm McCabe, Clampett's shorts were filled with this wild, rubbery energy. Characters did not move like humans or animals did, but like elastic shapes that came dangerously close to breaking model. The best examples would be shorts like Porky in Egypt, where Porky's camel has an elaborate heat-induced freakout.
It's the desert madness! Cannons to the right of me! Boots! 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 I'm going mad! It's the gallows!
Or quite possibly the most well-known of Clampett's accomplishments, Porky in Wacky Land. Set in an environment where weird humor trumps all logic, the short builds and builds on insane absurdity, especially when Porky finally meets the true star of the shorts, the Dodo. But it was his devotion to manic energy that also helped Clampett define the character of Daffy Duck and his place at Warner Brothers. Studio mandate required Porky be used in every Looney Tunes cartoon, so Bob decided that the wild and wacky Daffy would be the perfect comedic foil for simple every pig, Porky.
Get on your bicycle, Daffy.
Daffy ended up succeeding where Gabby failed. He and Porky had almost immediate chemistry in being total opposites of each other in every way, and it allowed them to work in nearly every character dynamic, from Daffy having the role as Porky's sidekick, to Porky just being another victim of Daffy's chicanery. The dynamic was also held by Clampett really bringing out the most in Porky as a character. Being the one who finalized the design of him while working at iWorks, Clampett saw a lot of himself in Porky, a cheerful soul who, by no fault of his own, found himself trapped in a world of madness with crazy characters. And it was this reading of him that really made him a stronger character than ever. Despite he and his staff being on the lower rung of the Termite Terrace hierarchy, Clampett was riding high. But there was one person who was not happy about his success. Since he first arrived at the studio, Chuck Jones worked alongside Bob Clampett. They were two animators who really brought out the best in each other, so when Clampett was first starting out as a director, he decided he needed Jones's help. From Porky's Bad Time Story to Porky's Papa, Jones acted as an unofficial assistant director to Clampett. Clampett would do the storyboards and the timing, while Jones, being a gifted draftsman, would draw the character layouts. Because of this, Jones believed that he and Bob co-directed these cartoons and that he would be credited as such. But when the shorts came out, they listed only Clampett as supervision, while Jones was just the animator. This did not sit well with Chuck Jones. He believed that Clampett went behind his back and gave himself all the credit, even though both of them did equal amounts of work. Back in those days, doing the layouts was considered the job of the director. While we don't know the true details of what went down, it could have been a case of Clampett saying that he and Jones were co-directors while forgetting that he wasn't in charge of how work got credited. But whether it was Clampett pulling a fast one or an honest mistake, the damage was done. This would lead to the falling out between the two men, and a grudge that Chuck Jones would carry for the rest of his days. But thankfully for Jones, he didn't have to wait long to leave Clampett's unit. In 1938, Frank Tashlin would once again leave Schlesinger Productions, this time voluntarily after a bitter argument between him and studio manager Henry Bender. Almost immediately, Chuck Jones inherited Tashlin's unit, and was given access to bigger budgets and the talents of animators Ken Harris and Robert McKimson. Chuck Jones made his official credited directorial debut on November 19, 1938, with The Night Watchman. Though the short, involving a young kitten being harassed by a group of mice gangsters, may seem quaint now, animation-wise, you can really see Jones getting the last laugh on his former friends. In the year 1939, Termite Terrace produced 44 animated shorts. This would be the most number of shorts produced in a year ever in the history of the studio. However, in retrospect, this was a very quantity over quality year for Warner Brothers. One obvious low spot were the shorts made by Dalton and Hardaway. Almost all of them felt like a step backwards for the studio. While their shorts could start out with an interesting premise, it would be wasted in their hands. Their pacing was sluggish and meandering, most of the gags were unfunny rehashes, and they relied heavily on lengthy musical numbers to pad out the shorts. Worse yet was that they had a recently promoted Rod Scribner under their stable and barely made use of his talent for drawing expressive animation, a style that was clearly straining under the slow pace of Dalton and Hardaway. Tex Avery fared much better, this being the year he produced some of his classic shorts such as Thugs with Dirty Mugs, Dangerous Dan McPhoo, and Amateur Night.
Now we have the world's smallest entertainer. Teeny tiny teensy tinny tinny tin.
But a flaw of his began to emerge in this era, namely how he was more focused on the gags rather than the animation. This was especially apparent in his travelogue parodies, of which Tex fully embraced for their ability to cram as many gags as possible in a single cartoon. And while these gags were funny, they rarely pushed the boundaries animation-wise, mostly relying on the sight and execution of the gag itself. Tex had been taught to animate in a very old-fashioned way, and really only saw animation as the vehicle for his gags. He did not fully understand how animation could greatly enhance them, at least not yet anyway. By contrast, Bob Clampett was fully embracing the medium to create the wildest and wackiest Looney Tunes shorts with Porky and Daffy at the forefront. He fully embraced the cartoon medium and based his shorts around gags that would be impossible to execute without his exaggerated style. He even took Tashlyn's Petunia and redesigned her to be cuter to complement Porky's streamlined look. But even as he liked Porky, you could tell Clampett was realizing that there was only so much you could do with him. And as the season dragged on, focus on Clampett's shorts began to shift away from Porky and more onto other characters such as Porky's rotating cast of pet dogs or disposable sidekicks like the murder-mouthed Dizzy Duck. Finally, on the opposite end of the spectrum, you had Chuck Jones's unit. Unlike the Madhouse that were Clampett's shorts, Jones's shorts were more lavishly animated and intricately drafted. Characters moved with a sense of realism and were often small characters stuck in a large, chaotic worlds. His most successful character created around this time would be Sniffles the Mouse.
How are you? Not so good. I got a cold in my head.
But as beautifully animated as these shorts were, their low energy caused them to feel out of step with the kind of shorts his contemporaries were doing. Even when Jones got a hold of goofy characters like Daffy, he felt more restrained than the Daffy seen in an Avery or Clampett short. Jones's style of high detail, low energy animation did end up filling a niche at Warner Brothers. Say the studio wanted to make a dead serious propaganda short about the importance of memorizing the Pledge of Allegiance. How do you know you'll get a lavishly animated product that fits with the short's pro-American patriotic doctrine? You get Jones's unit to do it.
And when George Washington signed that document, he laid the foundation for our great democracy.
Gee, that's wonderful.
It definitely felt like between late 1938 up to 1940, Termite Terrace was spinning its wheels. It was clear that Friz Freleng was sorely missed at the studio. Despite not being as innovative as either Avery, Clampett, or Jones, his understanding of how to mix animation and humor at the most basic level served as the guiding hand for the studio. Freleng's shorts were the perfect template that the others could build off of. Without him, their bad habits like Avery prioritizing the number of gags in a short, or Clampett using references to radio as a crutch began to make themselves more known. Termite Terrace had risen and established stars both on-screen and off, but now it had reached a plateau. If the studio wanted to be the perfect rival to Disney like so many of them wanted it to be, they needed something big. A big smashing success that would make the cartoons of Warner Brothers as much of a household name as the cartoons of Disney. It turns out, the answer was right under their noses the entire time.
This video was made possible by the good people at Patreon. If you want to support this miniseries, Kyoto Video, or all other future video projects, then click on the link below and join today. You'll get news feeds, early access to videos, maybe even your name in the credits. Each dollar will be going towards making this channel even better. You can also support this channel by liking this video, commenting on it, hitting the subscribe button, hitting that bell button for notifications, and sharing it with all your friends. That's all for now, folks. Thank you for watching.